Hello, so this is my second video. I thought I would try and do a voiceover. So my inspiration for this top, Pinterest of course, my folder here, these are kind of all the tops. Most of the inspiration came from the Elliot top there. I'll link to this top. There's a pattern there, but I just used this shirt from the thrift store. It wasn't the biggest shirt, but it worked out just fine. I'm just gonna start cutting everything into pieces. It was a little nerve-wracking because once you cut, you can't uncut. Pieces all dissected. Here I'm just kind of taking my body pieces and cutting them to the length that I want about the final top to be, taking into account that I'll hem the entire shirt at the end. So my pieces are trimmed. I kind of shaped out one side, so now I need to do the same thing to the other side. I just kind of folded until it looked about the same, placed some not so perfect darts right now, but the shape's there. Now I'm making some non-accurate kind of dart. I measured the bust points, but still kind of eyeballed them onto the mannequin. I'm not exactly sure if this is a real technique, but I think in the end it kind of worked out okay. So I just pinned the dart and kind of marked on the top and bottom where the pin was and used those dots as my guideline for making the dart. Now with my markings, I'll pin them, make sure everything's lined up, and then just sew it. And The way I like to do my darts is to start with my regular stitch length and then just make the stitch length a little bit shorter the closer I get to the very end of the dart. And I don't backstitch. I will just overhand knot later on. Now it's time to prep the front of the shirt for the neckline hem, and all I did here was press and cut away the old, what is it called, where the buttons go and where the buttonholes are. So I cut all that off and just made the tiniest of hems, maybe a 1/4 inch if that. Now for the sleeves, my useless math that didn't come in handy at all, I ended up using this pattern from a vintage sewing pattern because it had that kind of, not so much a poof effect, but more of like a gathered cap. And I just tried to make the sleeve as wide as I could with the fabric to make it have that poofier effect that I was going for. I ended up making the sleeve out of the old sleeve, and the shirt wasn't as big as I had wanted it to be. It was a men's shirt, but my size kind of man, and I didn't have too much fabric to work with. Now just kind of pinning the sleeve in place just to see how it'll possibly look once it's sewn on, and I was pretty happy with the result. Didn't have much of a choice because there's no more fabric. So in the beginning, when I dissected my shirt, the side seams and armhole seams had a little bit of extra folded over fabric, so here I'm kind of seam ripping those open just to give myself a little bit of extra seam allowance for the top. Now that I've sewn the gather stitches, time to gather and pin into the top, which is always a little tedious, moving around the gathers. in the sleeves to their final resting place. And now working on the elastic at the bottom of the sleeve so it has that cute poof. Almost done. Next, I need to sew the elastic. I don't really like sewing elastic. I just never feel like I'm doing it right. So I overlapped the pieces on top so it's flat. I sewed some small zigzag stitches at one point and then another set of zigzag stitches at the other end, hoping that doing 2 sets of zigzag stitches it would not come apart in the sleeve. So let's throw it on the mannequin and see. This part was not the most difficult, but slightly confusing, figuring out kind of not so much where they should go, but kind of how they should go. I think in this shirt I may have given a little bit too much curve. Didn't really affect the overall design, didn't ruin it or make it ugly, just I think next time I would go with a little bit less of a curve. shoulders, top and bottom, I ended up having to piece together a lot of scraps, which didn't make the smoothest of ties. The casings were fine, but the ties kind of have a lot of bumps, which make it a little hard to tie bows, but still perfectly fine. Finish the hem by overlocking it, folding over once, and then sewing. And this is the final result. Some things I would change, something with the darts and the armholes. It's a little hard to lift my arms up. But other than that, it's totally wearable. The casing placement, fine. It looks, I like the placing. It's comfortable. I'm pretty happy with my finishes and trying out this technique of using the casings and ties instead of buttons.